There is a mystery about the morning that many believers have ignored. Morning is not just the beginning of a new day. Morning is a spiritual gateway. What you do in the morning determines what will answer you throughout the day. Every day arrives carrying possibilities, battles, opportunities, and destinies. And prayer is the legal tool God has given man to influence how that day unfolds. Many people wake up reacting to life instead of commanding the day. They check their phones before they check their spirits. They allow circumstances to speak before they speak the word. But there is a realm where days are programmed, outcomes are shaped, and atmospheres are set, and that realm responds to prayer. Dangerous morning prayers are not emotional prayers. They are intentional, revelation-driven, word-backed prayers that align a believer with heaven's agenda. These prayers work because they are prayed from understanding, not desperation. The morning is when the soul is quiet and the spirit is sensitive. Scripture reveals that God himself engages early. Light was separated from darkness at the beginning. Manna fell in the morning. Jesus withdrew early to pray. Morning prayer is about taking spiritual advantage before distractions arrive. The morning is not just a transition between night and day. It is a highly sensitive spiritual moment where destinies can be shaped and outcomes can be influenced. Every new day arrives carrying both opportunities and challenges, and the first voice that speaks into that day often determines how it will respond. When a person understands this truth, they stop treating mornings casually and begin to approach them with spiritual intentionality. In the spiritual realm, timing matters. There are moments when the heavens are more responsive, and the morning is one of those moments. At the start of the day, the mind is less crowded, the atmosphere is quieter, and the spirit is more alert. This is why early engagement with God has always been a pattern for those who walk in depth and authority. Before distractions arise and responsibilities compete for attention, the morning offers a sacred opportunity to align the heart, soul, and body with divine purpose. What happens in the morning goes beyond personal devotion. It is about establishing spiritual control. When a believer prays early, they are not reacting to events that have already happened. They are taking initiative. They are speaking ahead of time, declaring what is permitted and what is forbidden in the hours ahead. Instead of allowing circumstances, emotions, or external pressures to dictate the flow of the day, prayer sets the direction and tone. The morning functions like a gate, because whatever is allowed entry at the beginning often gains influence throughout the day. When fear, anxiety, or confusion enters first, they tend to dominate thoughts and decisions. But when faith, clarity, and spiritual authority are established early, they govern everything that follows. Prayer becomes the tool that guards this gate, ensuring that the right forces take precedence. Many people struggle not because they lack effort or intelligence, but because they start their days spiritually unguarded. Battles that could have been prevented are fought unnecessarily simply because no spiritual structure was put in place early. Morning prayer is not about length or noise, it is about presence and alignment. Even a short but focused time of prayer can shift an entire day. There is also a dimension of instruction that is released in the morning. Divine wisdom often comes quietly through impressions, insights, and inner convictions. Those who rush into activity without prayer often miss subtle directions that could have saved them from mistakes. When the day is committed early, decisions become clearer and sensitivity to spiritual signals increases. Over time, this practice builds spiritual discipline and authority. The believer begins to notice patterns changing, delays reduce, favor becomes more consistent. There is a growing confidence that no matter what the day holds, it has already been committed into higher hands. This confidence is not arrogance, it is trust rooted in relationship. Treating the morning as a spiritual gateway transforms how life is lived. Days stop happening randomly and begin to follow divine order. Challenges may still arise, but they no longer take control. When the morning is secured in prayer, the rest of the day is forced to align. Effective prayer is not born out of noise, desperation, or emotional pressure. It flows from understanding. Many people pray loudly yet remain powerless because they do not know what they are doing spiritually. True authority in prayer comes when a believer understands who they are, what has been given to them, and how spiritual laws operate. When prayer is rooted in knowledge, it becomes precise, confident, and productive. Emotion-driven prayer often reacts to fear, pain, or urgency. While God is compassionate, prayer that is controlled only by emotion tends to rise and fall with circumstances. One day it is intense, the next day it disappears. But prayer that is grounded in understanding is stable. It continues even when feelings are absent, because it is anchored in truth rather than mood. Understanding begins with identity. A believer who does not know their standing before God will always pray like a beggar, hoping for mercy instead of enforcing covenant rights. When identity is unclear, prayer becomes uncertain. But when a person understands that righteousness grants access, boldness replaces hesitation. Prayer then becomes a confident approach, not a fearful attempt. There is also the understanding of the word. Prayer is most effective when it is aligned with what God has already spoken. Words spoken in prayer gain power when they agree with divine promises and principles. This is why revelation matters. When the word is understood, prayer stops being repetitive speech and becomes spiritual legislation. The believer is not trying to convince God, they are agreeing with him. Another dimension of understanding is spiritual awareness. Life is influenced by unseen realities. Many challenges are not solved by effort alone because their roots are spiritual. Without this understanding, people fight the wrong battles and blame the wrong things. Prayer informed by spiritual insight targets the true source of resistance and releases lasting solutions. Understanding also teaches patience and timing. Some prayers fail not because they are wrong, but because they are premature or misaligned. When a believer understands seasons, they learn when to contend, when to wait, and when to change strategy. This prevents frustration and burnout in prayer. Dangerous prayer is intentional. It knows what it wants and why it is asking. It does not wander aimlessly. Each word carries purpose. This kind of prayer is not rushed, yet it is not careless. It flows from clarity of mind and depth of spirit. Such prayer may not always be loud, but it is always effective. There is also the understanding of authority. Prayer is not only about asking, it is also about commanding. There are times when requests are appropriate and times when declarations are required. Without understanding, people beg where they should command and remain silent where they should speak. Knowledge restores balance and confidence. When prayer is driven by understanding, results follow consistently. Faith becomes stronger because it is supported by truth. Doubt loses its grip because the believer knows what is possible. Over time, prayer stops being a struggle and becomes a lifestyle of communion and influence. This kind of prayer works because it is intelligent, aligned, and rooted in spiritual law. It produces peace, confidence, and visible change, proving that understanding is the true power behind effective prayer. Morning prayer is a declaration of authority, not a ritual of routine. When a believer prays at the start of the day, they are stepping into a position of spiritual leadership over the hours ahead. Life was never designed to be lived on reaction alone. Without prayer, people spend their days responding to pressure, problems, and people. But through prayer, the believer takes command before events begin to unfold. Every day carries spiritual activity. Forces are at work shaping conversations, decisions, opportunities, and encounters. These forces do not wait for permission. They move according to spiritual laws. When prayer is absent, a person becomes vulnerable to being pushed by circumstances they did not choose. Morning prayer changes this by establishing authority early, before these forces gain momentum. Prayer in the morning functions like a watchtower. From that position, a believer gains clarity and foresight. They begin to see beyond the surface of things and discern what is beneficial and what is dangerous. This discernment is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is a gentle check in the spirit, a sense of caution, or a nudge to act differently. Those small promptings often prevent major regrets. Speaking is a critical part of enforcing authority. Silence allows opposing forces to dominate the narrative of the day. When a believer speaks in prayer, they are giving direction to their environment. They declare peace where chaos tries to rise. They release strength where weakness threatens. They command clarity where confusion attempts to settle. Words spoken in faith are not empty. They carry spiritual weight. Morning prayer also establishes alignment with divine will. Authority is not independent power, it flows from alignment. When a believer submits their plans, desires, and schedule in prayer, they gain the right to operate in authority. Resistance decreases because heaven supports what is aligned with its purpose. This alignment turns prayer into partnership rather than struggle. There are days when battles are avoided simply because authority was exercised early. Certain delays, misunderstandings, and losses are not inevitable. They are permitted when no spiritual boundaries are set. Morning prayer draws those boundaries. It declares what will not cross into the day and what must manifest within it. Consistency strengthens this authority. One day of prayer can bring relief, but a lifestyle of morning prayer produces mastery. Over time, the believer notices increased confidence, quicker spiritual response, and reduced fear of the unknown. They stop being intimidated by challenges because they understand that authority has already been established. This authority is not loud arrogance, it is quiet confidence rooted in relationship and truth. It does not depend on how the day feels or looks. Even when difficulties arise, the believer remains steady, knowing that the foundation of the day was already laid in prayer. Morning prayer transforms the believer from a victim of circumstances into a steward of influence. The day no longer controls them, they influence the day. This shift changes how life is experienced. Challenges become assignments rather than threats. Opportunities become clearer. Peace becomes more consistent. When authority is enforced early, the rest of the day responds accordingly. Events begin to align, decisions become wiser, and outcomes improve. Prayer does not remove responsibility, but it empowers it. By taking authority in the morning, the believer steps into the day prepared, protected, and positioned to prevail. Spiritual power is not released through occasional enthusiasm, but through disciplined consistency. Many people experience brief moments of breakthrough in prayer, yet struggle to maintain lasting change because their devotion is irregular. Consistency is what turns spiritual experiences into spiritual authority. When prayer becomes a daily practice rather than an emergency response, transformation begins to take root. A consistent prayer life reshapes the inner world before it changes the outer one. The mind becomes calmer, the spirit becomes sharper, and sensitivity to divine guidance increases. Instead of constantly battling confusion or emotional instability, the believer begins to walk with clarity and balance. This inner transformation is often the first evidence that prayer is working, even before external results appear. Consistency also trains the heart. Just as the body responds to regular exercise, the spirit responds to regular engagement. The more a believer prays, the more natural prayer becomes. Resistance decreases, distractions lose power. What once felt difficult becomes a source of strength. Prayer shifts from obligation to desire. Over time, consistent prayer alters spiritual atmosphere. Homes feel lighter, thoughts become cleaner, relationships improve. This is not because problems disappear, but because spiritual authority increases. When prayer is sustained, it creates an environment where peace has the upper hand and fear loses influence. Atmospheres respond to presence, and consistent prayer invites a higher presence into daily life. Consistency also produces endurance. Life is full of seasons, and not every season is emotionally motivating. There are days when prayer feels powerful and days when it feels dry. Those who depend on emotion will stop, but those who value discipline will continue. It is in these moments of persistence that deep strength is built. Breakthrough often comes after the habit has been firmly established. Another result of consistent prayer is spiritual maturity. The believer learns how to listen, not just speak. Discernment improves. Reactions become wiser. Instead of rushing into decisions, there is a growing habit of seeking direction first. This maturity protects from unnecessary mistakes and repeated cycles. Consistent prayer also guards against pride and discouragement. When things go well, prayer keeps the heart humble and grateful. When things go wrong, prayer provides stability and hope. It becomes an anchor that holds steady regardless of circumstances. This balance is a mark of true spiritual growth. Transformation through consistency is gradual but undeniable. Changes may not be dramatic at first, but they are deep and lasting. Old habits lose their grip. New patterns of thinking form. Faith becomes stronger, not because problems vanished, but because trust increased. In time, the believer realizes that prayer has become part of their identity, not just an activity. It shapes how they think, speak, and respond to life. This is when prayer moves beyond routine and becomes a channel of influence. Consistency turns ordinary devotion into extraordinary impact. It ensures that spiritual progress is not temporary but sustained. Through steady, disciplined prayer, lives are reshaped, atmospheres are transformed, and lasting victory becomes possible.